I said before, I'll say it again, I believe Don't Ask, Don't Tell doesn't contribute to our national security. In fact, I believe preventing patriotic Americans from serving their country weakens our national security. My administration is already working with the Pentagon and members of the House and the Senate on how we'll go about ending this policy, which will require an act of Congress.
It would require an act of Congress, but then why would the White House be putting the kibosh on exactly that kind of act of Congress? What you just saw there was the president speaking 1 month ago today about his long-stated opposition to the Pentagon's policy of kicking people out of the military because they're gay. Congressman Hastings of Florida introduced an amendment this week to the Defense Appropriations Act that would have prevented the government from spending money on kicking gays out of the military. And then the next day, he withdrew that amendment, releasing a statement explaining that he withdrew it, quote, due to pressure from some of my congressional colleagues and from the White House. Well, today, the Service Members Legal Defense Network told us in response that, quote, we hope it is not true that the White House pressured Representative Hastings to withdraw his amendment to stop funding Don't Ask, Don't Tell investigations. Such a move would go against President Obama's commitment to end Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Now we need to see some positive action, some follow-through from this White House. Joining us now is Congressman Hastings, Democrat of Florida, the man who was thwarted yesterday in his attempt to cut off funding for the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Congressman Hastings, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel. I like that word, thwarted, because that's exactly what I was.
Well, tell me how that happened. What sort of pressure did you receive from the White House? How did it all go down?
Well, certainly I didn't speak with President Obama. Let me get that very clear. But how the process works is there are liaisons that work here at the Capitol that come from the White House. And before the Rules Committee meets, there is a meeting. In this particular instance, there were persons from the White House that were there. And when the discussion was had with reference to my amendment, they chimed in. And their thinking, Rachel, is different than I believe yours and mine would be. I have a different political calculus. If something is bigoted, and if your intent is to see to it that it does not continue, then I did not understand the leadership of Congress or the White House saying that the time is not right. My position is the president has said that he wishes that this matter be repealed. My colleague Patrick Murphy now has more than 170 co-sponsors on a measure to repeal it. Secretary Gates has said, I'm glad he is now saying when we change our policy. Last year he would have been saying if, but my view is that the time is now to eliminate this bigoted law once and for all.
When you are hearing that the time isn't right, when you're hearing from fellow Democrats, even from fellow opponents of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that it's not, the time's not right for your amendment, that this ought to be delayed, that there's a more strategic way to do it, are you also hearing that there is a White House-endorsed strategy for when to get rid of it, or is it just being put off indefinitely?
Very good question. I have not heard anything other than the rhetoric. I wrote to the White House on June 22nd and had 76 other members of Congress to join me in a letter to the president explaining what the president can do right now. And that's what I was attempting to do with the amendment. And that's say to the Secretary of Defense, stop it. Just don't put anybody else out of service. Rachel, I'd be terribly remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to say how I came to this is the soldiers that we are forcibly separating are combat veterans. They're intelligence officers. They speak the languages that we need on the battlefield. So aside from the absurdity of telling dedicated soldiers that we don't want them because they're gay, this law negatively impacts our national security. And that's what your tee shot showed that the president was doing. And let me just go one step further and say in the last 5 years, we've put out of the service under this policy 59 Arabic speakers and 9 Farsi linguists. I serve on the Select Committee on Intelligence, and I'm telling you, we cannot afford at all not to have language speakers with the paucity of language speakers we have in the intelligence community.
Congressman Hastings, as you know, the Beltway common wisdom on this is that this is an incredibly sensitive issue, that a lot of political capital needs to be invested in this, that President Clinton was immeasurably hurt by the way that he pursued this issue at the start of his first term. Do you think that that's true? Do you think that that's true now, that this would be an incredibly risky issue for the president to take a leadership role on?
I really do not. The majority of Americans do not support don't ask, don't tell. Without question, every poll has shown an uptick in favor of us getting rid of this policy. And the one that is particularly salient is that members of the military are in favor of getting rid of this policy. It is shameful for us to continue to wait with reference to this matter. I keep hearing that we'll do it next year. Well, in my view, that's ridiculous. If you know we want to do it, let's do it today and spare any more of our servicemen and women from the humiliation of being investigated for their sexual orientation.
Congressman Alcee Hastings of Florida, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for your eloquence on this issue. It's great to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you, Rachel.